I love when champions get buffed in MCOC. It feels like Christmas. I'm just playing. Most buffs just completely miss the mark, or in some cases are just downright horrible. With all these buffs we've gotten in this game's history, I thought it would be a fun idea to go back and see which ones were the worst we've ever gotten, and if you've seen the title, you know exactly where this goes. I made a list. Okay, so before we get into this list, I'm going to go over a couple of ground rules. First off, I won't be including any buffs of champions that were bad, but eventually received a buff that made them a lot better. I'm strictly going over champions that are still bad to this day. Secondly, this list is only going to go over the older champion buffs, nothing from the balance program, so Sandman's exempt from this list. Why? I don't know. Finally, this list is just my non-professional opinion. If you don't agree with this list, feel free to type your own list in the comments, but please be civil and do not get mad at me. Alright, that's all I had to say. Let's get straight into the video, shall we? In my opinion, the 10th worst buff Kabam has ever made is the Sentry. Now, I'm aware that people actually like this buff. I'm definitely not one of them. There's a multitude of reasons for that. I mean, hell, I was in OMCOC saying that Sentry is deserving of the top 10 worst buffs, and people were like, you what? But I'm not here to necessarily talk about that. I'm just here to talk about why the buff sucks, and there's three main reasons for that. One being damage. Now, if you're paying attention to the background footage, you might be saying, Ham, come on, look at that damage. You're really saying that that's bad? And my answer to that is a resounding yes. What you're seeing here is the aftermath of Sentry's ramp up, and his ramp up is really bad. So Sentry was actually always a ramp up champion, but before all you needed to do was hit increments of 40 in your combo meter, and then you get a reality warp. And before his stack limit was 5, it's been increased to 10. It's whatever, I don't really care. What I do care about, however, is how he gets the reality warps now. His new playstyle involves placing debuffs on the opponent. This alters between which phase you're in. Placing a debuff on the opponent places a buff on yourself. Throwing a special attack converts all buffs into these thingies. When you hit 20 of these thingies, you go into your next phase. You have 3 phases. When you hit the final phase, you go back into phase 1 and get a persistence charge. Repeat this until you get 10 persistence charges. Okay, so I'm sorry if you had an aneurysm listening to me say that, so let me explain a couple things, like his phases, for example. He has 3 of them. One of them increases his medium and light attack damage, the other increases his heavy attack damage, and you wanna guess what the third one does? It does nothing. Why? He's not that good anyway! So yeah, overall, Sentry's phase changing system in this game is very clunky and poorly executed, especially the heavy chaining phase where you have to kill all your momentum in order to get heavy attack openings. And you could say that the stun he gets while charging his heavy attack makes it a lot easier to get openings. You know what? I agree. It's very good. The problem is you need 6 persistent charges to unlock it. And then that's the overall final problem I have with him. His utility doesn't really counter any of the late game stuff that he's aimed at. Okay, so wrapping this spot up because I was talking for way too long, there's 2 things I want to see change with Sentry. The first thing being the stun that I previously mentioned. It should be moved to 0 persistent charges instead of 6. That would just make him feel way smoother than he currently is. Okay, and finally, when he hits 10 persistent charges, instead of having to cycle through all his phases again, he should just get a singular phase called the Power of a Million Suns, which just bundles all 3 of them into one. I personally don't think this is too game-breaking, especially since he loses a persistent charge every time he dies. That means if you die, you have to ramp up still. I think it's a pretty good payoff. And yeah, that was the 10th spot on this list. Nothing overall terrible, just very disappointing. Now let's move on. And my pick for the 9th overall worst buff is Venom Pool. Ugh. Why do people still think this buff is good? He's just ramp up Venom. So if you're confused, this guy got buffed in August of 2021 along 2 other characters, the Hood and King Groot. And why I'm upset is because this guy completely stole the spotlight from the other 2. Why? It's so weird. Like, I'll be real, those 2 are really good in their own right, but Venom Pool being better than both of them? No. Community's wrong there. Let me explain. So, as I previously stated, Venom Pool is now a ramp-up champion, but not in the same sense as someone like Sentry, where your ramp persists between each fight using him. No, you have to ramp every fight using Venom Pool, because it doesn't persist. Okay, so far it's a little bit worrisome, but not completely deal-breaking. After all, people like King Groot have this exact same playstyle, and he's actually pretty good. So for characters like this, it's all about the ramp-up and the payoff that you get for that ramp. So let's talk about it real quick. Venom Pool's new playstyle is very straightforward. You just hit the opponent and get 4 cookie meter every time you hit the opponent. Every time you hit 100, you get a buff, and eventually you'll get Furies when you hit every single one of those types of buffs. You get a little bit of a bonus when you nullify buffs off the opponent, but we'll talk more about that in the utility section. As of right now, we're talking solely about damage, and there's a lot of avenues that increases damage. First off, the Furies, as I previously stated, a couple of the cookie meter buffs also give him a little bit more damage, and then the primary source of damage is his damage over time at the end of his special attacks. So in practice, what's his damage looking like with all these factors? It's okay. And that's where the problem lies. For all that ramp up, you're basically getting average damage for a champion in 2025. And as for the utility side, this guy sucks, I'll be straight up with you. The only universal utility that he has for every matchup is Nullify on a special one, but you know, Venom has that. And then he also, against tech champions, has power control immunity, but you know, Venom also has that. So yeah, overall, this guy just brings absolutely nothing new to the table. There's a lot of other characters that can do what he does, and because of the ramp up, it just makes him very obsolete. And the 8th worst buff goes to Daredevil Hell's Kitchen, and I think that this is the first buff that a lot of people can agree should be on this list. And honestly, that sucks, because I feel like Daredevil has a really good chance of being a good champion if his kit just worked a little bit better. So basically, this new version of Daredevil involves using the combo meter at all times. It's kind of like a reverse Aegon where you're spending combo to gain abilities rather than just building it up. And honestly, the best part about this buff is that the ramp up is relatively short and his playstyle is pretty smooth. The two problems that this guy has is, one, he doesn't have any utility at all, and two, his damage just falls really short. So this guy's damage loop is pretty straightforward. You just want to stay around the 30 to 40 combo range, because using a heavy attack converts 10 combo meter to cruelty, and every time you use a special 2, you consume 15 combo meter. Ideally, you want to throw 2 special 2s with this guy. The first one you want to make sure is above 30 combo meter, and then the second one you want to make sure it's at 30 combo meter or less. This will give you 2 fury buffs, so you can absolutely hammer into the opponent. Oh. Yep, his damage payoff is very bad, so that kind of killed him for a lot of people. But what about his utility? He occasionally purifies non-damaging debuffs, and at max sig, you can basically ignore Thorn's damage. Oh yeah, and he also has this line of text where base regen rate is set at 40% instead of the normal 100%. I guess this was kind of thrown out the window when Diablo and Sinister got released, but whatever. So yeah, overall, compared to the other two, I actually really like this guy's kit and his ideas, but unfortunately, the execution was just really bad. And it's only downhill from here, so moving on. And the 7th worst buff is
Adrian Toombs, aka Vulture.
Another buff that I think most people can agree on. This guy got outclassed really quickly. And that's really unfortunate, because I think Vulture's really cool in the MCU, but unfortunately in here it's just really clunky. Some stuff like his Raptor Strike, for example, which is super crucial to his kit, requires you to dash back and immediately medium attack in order to activate it. It's super impractical. He just has a lot of these weird choices sprinkled through. Like, another thing is that you want to crit a bunch with him in order to gain a bunch of abilities, but he also has a super low crit rate. So good luck trying to get your abilities, but also he has another thing where every time you dex, you trigger Incinerate. You'd think this is good because of a couple of abilities he has, but it also invalidates a crit, basically. Okay, but all this stuff existed pre-buff, so what about post-buff? Did it make it any better? No, and it actually added a couple more things. So one of the biggest damage features that the post buff added is armor breaks on the heavy attack. And the biggest problem with this armor break is it stacks up to 5, so that means you have to weave in a bunch of heavy attacks, which just makes for an even clunkier loop than already before. Oh yeah, and also to apply these armor breaks, you have to consume 25 Chitauri charges in order to even do that. These charges are by far the worst thing about his kit, because it's entirely how everything in his abilities work, and the way you gain them is by critting, like I previously stated. It gives you 10. What breaks this is because you're critting so little, you're never getting them, and you're expending so many. You lose 10 every time you dex, you lose 25 every time you apply an armor break, and you lose 40 every time you trigger the Raptor Strike. So in the average matchup with this guy, you're expending way more charges than you're actually gaining, so you're never seeing any of your abilities at all. And then you probably piece this together already, but this guy doesn't have any utility. He has armor break and power drain, but that's just kind of a standard for tech champions nowadays, so it's kind of useless. This guy's just the culmination of a lot of weird choices, and I think he'd need a lot more in order to make him actually good. And in my opinion, the 6th overall worst buff is Yellow Jacket. Now, you could debate this one because a lot of people would say that his only real problem is his damage, because let's be real, it's really bad. But I have to disagree. I think his utility is also kind of outdated. But first, let's talk about the obvious thing, which is his damage, because everyone knows it's terrible. I have zero idea why, but they did not change his damage pre-buff, and this guy came out in 2015. If you want a good idea of what damage was like in 2015, just go play with Cap World War II. He was one of the top dogs back then. The only way to do damage with Yellow Jacket is through power stings, and in 2025, there are a lot of characters that can mitigate that damage now, so he's even worse than when his buff originally came out. Yeah, nothing new there. Everyone knows this, but the reason I ranked him on this list and lower than all the other guys I previously mentioned is because his utility is also very outdated. When looking through his kit, there's only 2 really big things that you actually see. There's a lot of other bits of utility, but they're so niche it doesn't really matter. The 2 biggest things he has is resistances and a petrify. And yeah, while Petrify is basically a science staple, I don't think his is that potent. He gets a 50% one on his special 2, and then he has a built-in one that goes up to, I think, 150% max. So a 200% Petrify ain't really that good when you're considering that other characters like Leader just came out. And as for his resistances, I actually kind of like this part of his kit. He has a medium physical resistance and a high energy resistance just built into his kit, no inputs required. It does give him a pretty good amount of versatility, especially with the energy resistance, because you can take characters that would do unavoidable energy damage. But the problem here is that it's not really that useful because you can just use a character that has immunities instead. So with outdated utility and very clearly outdated damage, it's clear that this guy deserves a spot on this list. The 5th worst buff ever made is Civil Warrior. You wanna know a fun fact? I spent $1,000 on this guy, and he's absolutely terrible. Which honestly sucks, because this has to be one of the coolest characters I've ever seen in a game. He's actually Kabam original, if you didn't know that. I also like his backstory, where basically he's an alternate dimension Steve Rogers who ended up killing Iron Man during the events of Civil War, and as a result ended up taking up Iron Man's legacy as the Civil Warrior. In game form, however, this translates to he has the bitch who doesn't want anything to do with conflict. So a lot of people know this already, but Civil Warrior's new playstyle involves dashing back and holding block for virtually the entire fight. And obviously, this playstyle has flaws. So let's talk about them. So if you didn't like Spock's playstyle where you have to block the whole fight and take a bunch of block damage, be alarmed because Civil Warrior has the exact same playstyle, but he doesn't have any way to mitigate the block damage. I mean, sure, when he's awakened, he has that weakness, but that only applies when you're blocking a special attack. Most of the time when you're using Civil Warrior, when you're dashing back and holding block, the opponent just goes in, does a medium attack, and then immediately charges their heavy attack, which ultimately wastes precious time for his Furies, which is the second biggest problem with this kit. The new way Civil Warrior does damage is when he dashes back and holds block, he converts all existing armor ups on him into Fury buffs. And that sucks, because the Furies have a relatively short duration, and you can't pause them in any way, shape, or form. And that's why this playstyle is so demanding and bad. If he had any way to pause those Furies, or if they were just a little bit longer, it would be so much better. I think the best way to improve this would be every time he holds block, he pauses his Furies on him, and then when he lets go of the block, it pauses for about 0.5 seconds after. You know, it's not much, but I guess it's something, and God knows how much he needs in order to be a viable champion. And I know some of you are probably screaming, okay, he doesn't deserve the number 5 spot. I mean, look at his damage. That's actually really good. Okay, let me show you his utility real quick. Yeah, that's what I thought. So overall, this buff sucks, and everyone knows it. And unfortunately, with him being a trophy champion now, I don't think he's ever going to receive a buff, which is royally unfortunate. And in my opinion, the 4th worst overall buff is Thor Jane Foster. Time for a bit of a quickie here, because the only thing that really changed here is her character model. So basically what this buff did was put her sig ability into her base kit and give her 2 heavy staggers instead of 1. Riveting, I know, she can crit all the time instead of just when she's duped, so good. As you might have guessed with the champion who previously had no damage or utility who got buffed with nothing getting changed for either sides, her damage and utility are still a problem. Like, I can't really talk much about her because not even a few months after she got buffed, Juggernaut got buffed, who quite literally does everything she does but better. I mean, hell, he even got 2 heavy staggers instead of 1 as well, so why even use Jane Foster in that sense? The best thing I can say about her buff is that she's a mystic who does guaranteed crits, but the problem is she did that pre-buff, and when are you ever gonna need that? I'm not even gonna bother explaining why buff bad, everyone knows buff bad. Okay, let's move on to number 3. And the champion taking home bronze for the worst buff ever made is Guillotine OG. So this character is one of the victors in one of those buff champion votes, and those actually have a pretty good track record, with the ones I can remember being Luke Cage, the first time, Colossus, and more recently, Cyclops Blue Team and X-23, who hasn't actually been released yet. I mean, it's clear that this character is a clear outlier compared to all those other ones, and I mean, hell, even a couple characters that lost that buff vote ended up getting buffed after and are still better than her. For example, the runner-up to Guillotine, Ant-Man, also got a buff, and while I think that buff is mid, it's nowhere near top 10 material. I think the best way to sum up this buff is that people like Deathless Gilly better than her, and that version of Gilly is just a pre-buff version of her. So why was this buff underwhelming? Was it the damage, the playstyle, the utility? How about all? I think the biggest sin overall is that pre-buff she was actually pretty well respected for being a non-traditional mystic who didn't need to counter anything, but with the buff they made it so that she had to be a mystic champion. They had to have buffs in order for her to do a lot of damage, but she doesn't have any way to counter those buffs at all. What was the point? Your opponent's so much stronger than they were, and you only have a plus 5% chance to inflict the... On the topic of bleeds, the reason that original bleed got nerfed to a 35% chance was to make way for the bleed curse. So every time you use a heavy attack, the first hit has a 100% chance to apply this bleed curse, and it stacks up to 7, I've noticed. Every time you throw a special attack, each hit applies 1 bleed per amount of bleed curse on the opponent. So with their 3-hit special 2, you're looking at roughly 21 bleeds, so that could be a lot of damage, right? What does it translate to exactly? Roughly 5 degens of Onslaught special 2. So her playstyle is parry heavy, boring as hell, and her damage is pretty mid. Okay, what about her utility? Fuck, the least generous amount of healing ever in a heal reversal. I mean, you can literally take the opponent's health, multiply it by 0.03, and boom, that's how much health you're getting the entire And I wonder, where have I seen the heal reversal before? I don't know, with every champion ever. And then she also has this ability called Pain Link, so basically every time you take damage, the opponent takes damage. Why? Because sharing is caring? Yep, one of the worst buffs of all time. Big round of applause for everyone that voted for this buff instead of Ant-Man. Yeah? Okay, let's move on to number 2, shall we? And the second worst buff Kabam has ever made is... Karnak. Who? Everybody forgot about him. This one's kind of hard for me because I can't really tell you anything that this guy does because he doesn't really do anything. I mean, I'm only going to really talk about his damage because let's be honest, his utility didn't even get changed. They only increased his damage and his utility is just terrible. It sucks. So this guy has a singular way to deal damage, and that's throw SB2s, knock down the opponent, preferably by punishing them with your heavy attack, and then boom, you go with their damage. And for a character who has absolutely nothing else to offer, his damage is bad. I mean, hell, when this guy's buff came out, people were saying that his buff was just okay because his damage was just okay. But now that standards have increased, his damage has fallen off even more, just making it plain bad. And I've said this before, but this guy has 0 utility. He has 3 things, and that's a True Strike on the special 1, and he reduces non-damaging debuff duration by 60% and reduces poison damage by 65%. I mean, the poison damage reduction was solely done to make him suicide viable. There is absolutely 0 other reason to use that poison reduction at all. So, you know, that's a bummer. And as for his True Strike, it's on his special 1, so it's one of those abilities where you basically have to choose between whether or not you want the True Strike or you want your damage through the special 2, which is also very unfortunate. And then he actually has something that I kind of like, and it's reducing the non-damaging debuff duration by 60%. In a world where all skill champions just purify the debuffs, being able to reduce this duration is actually pretty viable and allows them to get past a couple matchups that normal skill champions might not have been able to. But you know, one niche ability isn't enough to save a character from being absolutely terrible. So yeah, that was the Karnak buff for you. Very bland, very forgettable, and just straight up bad. So before I give you my top pick for the worst buff that Kabam has ever made, I would like to go through a couple dishonorable mentions first. Miles Morales. Now you might think that this might deserve the top 10 worst spot material because it's not really doing anything. Well, that's because what he used to do is completely obsolete now, that being able to miss unblockable attacks. I gave him the pass here because what he aimed to do in his buff he did rather well. Gambit. Not much to talk about here. His biggest flaw is that his special attacks do not increase his crit rating, so you're never seeing crits, which is very important for his kit. Psycho Man. This guy deserves number 1 without a doubt, but I decided to exclude him because let's be honest, nothing changed. It wasn't even a buff, they just increased his fury duration. Nightcrawler. Now this is the most disagreeable one on the list in my opinion, that's why he's a dishonorable mention, and he could see a use with Nick Fury now being a 7-star, but as of right now I don't really see a use for him in-game. Thor Ragnarok. This guy deserves top 10 worst ranking in a worst animation video, but as for the buff, I actually have a soft spot for it. I think it's completely fine. Now with all those out of the way, I present to you, without question, the worst buff that Kabam has ever made. The number 1 spot goes to... Yondu, one of the most baffling characters I've ever seen get buffed in this game. Now you could argue that this is cheating a little bit because they did say that they're going to give him another buff in August, but look at the date, it's May, we have 3 months of bad Yondu. I'm keeping. Where to even start with this guy, because literally everything in his kit just does not make sense at all. Let's talk about the most important thing first, that being his playstyle. And right off the bat, there's straight up just a massive contradiction in his kit. And you might not even believe me, because how could a champion's abilities contradict themselves? Quite literally, the developer of the Yondu buff coming up agreed with me, and I didn't even tell him what I was talking about at first. In case you're curious as to what I'm talking about, his special 2 gives him a fury effect every time the opponent throws a special attack, up to a maximum of 12. And this is just the first problem I have with this kit in general. Asking the opponent to throw 12 special attacks is wild. That's 12 bars of power, let alone letting the AI decide that. What if they don't want to throw special? It's completely AI dependent and I don't like it. But here's where the contradiction I was talking about occurs. So every debuff on the opponent reduces their combat power rate by 10% up to a maximum of 50%. So not only do you have this massive ask of the opponent throwing 12 special attacks, but now you're reducing their combat power, making it even longer for you to get to that 12 in the first place. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That even this guy's damage reward for getting those 12 Furies is not even that good. When I was just getting the footage for this video, I can safely say that his damage seemed lower than everyone on this list, other than Yellow Jacket, of course. That's just straight up not good, especially considering that he has one of the longer ramp-ups on this list. And then one of the other things that this guy has is a bleed every time he utilizes his Yaka arrow, so every first and third light attack. You can look at this two ways. One, it's a 40% chance to even trigger, so you can go through massive hot streaks without even getting a bleed. Or two, it's a debuff, so it's counting towards that contradiction I talked about earlier. Okay, sure, maybe his damage is underwhelming, but what about his utility? Maybe it's really good. Nope. He has 2 bits of utility that you probably know, which is prowess and armor removal and heal block. Let's talk about the prowess removal real quick because it's the most innocent thing he has. Completely safe, 50% chance on all attacks to remove 1 prowess and give yourself an armor up. The reason this ability kind of sucks now is because a lot of the mutant champions that are coming out just don't have prowess, so what's even the point? As for the other side of this, he can do it with armor up buffs as well, but it's a 25% chance, so it's even worse actually. And then he also has a heal block. I hate his heal block. Doesn't even have the common courtesy of being a heavy attack heal block like Red Skull or Civil Warrior. It's a special 1 heal block. Granted, it's a very long heal block if you throw it when the opponent's healing, but it's still a special 1 heal block, which basically means, because you need special 3s to throw damage, you're basically choosing between heal block or damage. And that sucks. I'm never going to throw the special 1s because his damage without the Furies is just straight up awful. And that's it. That's the absolute trash that was Yondu. The only buffs that I think can compare to this one are the ones of the champions that got buffed the second time and became a lot better. Obviously, they're excluded from this list. So it makes sense that Yondu's following in their footsteps by also receiving a buff, but as of right now, he's number 1 on this list. And that was my ranking of the top 10 worst buffs this game has ever produced. And everyone's ranking is completely different. If you want to have a different ranking, make sure to tell me in the comment sections. If you like the video, like it. If you dislike it, dislike it. But I'm completely done here, and I'll see you in the next video.